Good evening, good evening. As Michael said, my name is Justin Stairs and I head the news operation on Brussels Signal. We're very happy to have Konstantin Kisin here this evening. He is a comedian. Do you still do stand-up comedy?
I'm going to be decidedly unfunny tonight.
You're not funny this evening, but you're a former comedian. Is that the right way? A former comedian, podcaster, speaker, and author. He shot to world fame, I think that's fair to say, with a speech to the Oxford Union. Was that this January? This January at Oxford, at the university in England, which he argued that the woke movement had gone too far, and that's been viewed millions of times around the world. But prior to that, he was already well known for his bestseller, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, which drew on your experience as a child in the former Soviet Union. He is co-host of Trigonometry, which is a very successful podcast, which many of you have no doubt already come across. It has, I checked this morning, it has 654,000 subscribers. And his presence here in Brussels is timely because, as you lot know, the European Commission is rolling out censorship legislation. I think that's a fair way to describe it. And it is already threatening or, quote unquote, investigating social media platforms. Mark Zuckerberg's Threads, as you know, has not bothered to set up in the European Union out because of these regulatory concerns. There have been rumors that Musk's X might pull out. He's denied it, I know, but you know, some of these denied stories turn out to be true. And talks, as we reported today on Brussels Signal, talks between the European Commission and Mr. Musk are not going well. So, I wonder, obviously, Konstantin, you've been involved in you're at the front line of the English-speaking world and the free speech debate, but you must be following a bit of what's happening here on the continent as well. And I wonder to what extent this is an Anglophone debate. I mean, here on the continent, for example, here in the European Parliament, the majority of MEPs are in favour of censorship legislation. They're in favour. There are one or two who believe in free speech, but the majority are happy to give the European Commission these censorship powers. And I'm wondering, maybe we, as English speakers, maybe we think about this free speech issue a bit differently to how they think about it on the continent. Just one example. In France, for example, they've been clamping down on free speech for decades. As I learned at university, President Pompidou once said, La télévision, c'est la voix de la France. TV is the voice of France. And that was his justification for saying we have to control what's going on. So maybe, maybe the reason why the Commission can do this is because, in fact, they are supported by the majority of Europeans. Anyway, that was just a thought. Over to you, Konstantin.
There goes my whole speech. No, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, first of all. Patrick and his team asked me to say a few words about why free speech matters first and foremost, and where I think we are in the conversation and the battle over it. So first of all, why it matters. I won't give you, there's lots of the usual arguments we could talk about, the Galileos of the world who, this plucky upstart who comes along and challenges the dogma of his day and is suppressed by the people in charge who follow dogma. That's why we all know these arguments, we understand them. For me, there are two arguments I want to share with you tonight about why I think free speech matters. One is slightly philosophical, the other one is much more practical. The philosophical argument for me is that we are human beings, and human beings are a thinking species. The reason we succeeded through evolution, the reason we survived, the reason we are here, is we outthought the competition. And you cannot think without speaking. It's not possible. You cannot think without speaking. You have to be able to speak in order to think. I didn't come up with this idea, by the way. I learned this from my grandmother, who was born in a gulag. My grandmother, not my great-great-great-great-grandmother, my grandmother was born in the gulag in the Soviet Union. She's alive today, lives in England. You can go and talk to her. And this is something that she explained to me when I was a little boy. She said the reason that people were put in concentration camps in the Soviet Union was not only to prevent them from saying the thing that people didn't want them to say, but it was to prevent them from thinking the things that they were not supposed to think. And that is why free speech matters, number one. Number two, slightly more practical reason, I suspect, I don't know if you'll agree with me, that had we had the opportunity to allow citizens of this continent and the United Kingdom and Ireland to express their views on things like illegal immigration over the last 20 years, I don't imagine we would have had quite as many people celebrating the mass murder of Jews in the last 2 weeks in our streets. I don't think that would have happened. The ability to express our concerns in a democracy about the things that are happening in our society is what allows us to vent the frustrations and to achieve the democratic objectives of the people of our continent, of our country. If we do not have that, we are going down a very dark path, because the more you keep the lid on the pressure cooker, the more pressure is going to be building up. So that's why I think free speech matters. And some of the unconventional arguments, at least, for it. Where are we? Where are we on free speech? Well, it's a kind of good news, bad news situation, if you ask me. I think often when we talk about this issue, it's very tempting to imagine, I mentioned the gulags, it's very tempting to imagine that the reason we have problems with free speech is that we are run by these authoritarians, these evil, tyrannical people who want to take away our freedom to say what we think because they're oppressive and tyrannical. And I don't know that that's true. When I look at the online safety bill in the UK, when I see the hate speech bill in Ireland, when I see the Digital Services Act here in Europe, which is attempting to restrict what people can say, and really attempting to incentivize big tech companies to censor people themselves so that the government doesn't have to. This is the whole idea, right? We will make them fine you, we will fine you so that you censor yourself. Are they doing it for that reason? I actually don't think so. I'll tell you a story. We obviously have a European audience, but do you guys know Question Time, BBC Question Time? It's a program on British TV. It used to be good about 10, 15 years ago before they started letting riffraff like me on there. The last time I was on it, I don't know if you know this, but they have a bunch of questions from the audience, and the panel then addresses the questions. The first question is actually not recorded and not broadcast. It's a kind of warm-up. And the first question on the day that I did it last was it was on the day that Donald Trump had just been unbanned by Facebook. And they went around the panel and said, what do you guys think about it? And I made what I thought was a rather uncontroversial point, that while I don't necessarily like Donald Trump, I think the President of the United States should be allowed to speak in a public square, which was met with some hostility. The conversation went around the table, and then we got to the Labour representative, the left-wing party representative, who said, "We must have the safest internet in the world." To applause. These people don't understand trade-offs. They don't understand that when you take away freedom, that's how you get safety. The way you get safety is by taking away freedom. And I did say to her, safer than North Korea? Didn't seem to register at all. So I don't think we are in the gulags. I don't think these people are evil. I don't think most of them are tyrannical. That's the good news. The bad news is, I think in many ways it's much worse than that, for precisely the reason that I just explained. I think many of you will be familiar with the C.S. Lewis quote, which is that a tyranny which is exercised for the benefit of the victims is probably the worst tyranny of all. Because he said it would be better to be ruled by robber barons, because a robber baron's cruelty can at least sleep. But the people who torment you for your own good will torment you forever, because they do so with the approval of their own conscience. And that, I'm afraid, is, I think, where we are. That is the real bad news in this situation. That's, I think, the state of free speech in Western Europe at the moment. Now, I have to find some good news. I'm a parent. My wife and I had our first child a year and a half ago. I say my wife, she had our first child, not me, because we're old school. And the positive version of this, the upside, I think, is the reason that I think these people are doing this is the very same reason that I think we can actually win. And let me explain what I mean. I have some things I want to say about this, but why are they doing this? They're doing this because the elites are losing control of the narrative. That's why they're doing this. They see the breaking of the media landscape. They see the democratization of the information space. The fact that the people are seizing the means of information production from them. And they're terrified. That is why we are seeing the attempts to crack down on free speech. That is why we are seeing a lot of censorship, because they're losing control. That is why they're concerned. And the other thing I want to say, and particularly here tonight with Brussels Signal, is I think that the internet, the digital revolution we are living through, has opened up an immense opportunity for people who are prepared to speak the truth, who are prepared to challenge narratives. I mean, I have made a career of saying some incredibly obvious things that people now find controversial. That is all I do. Right, and to the extent that that is possible, there is an opportunity for new media organizations like Brussels Signals, like Trigonometry, and like many others to change the narrative, to make an impact, and to bring people with us. I think we're in a position where actually the majority of the public agree with us. 6 out of 10 people on the European continent think that free speech is very important. You're right that in the Anglosphere, Justin, it's even more the case, particularly in the United States. But the majority of the public are on our side, and I found this out in 2018 when I was still a comedian. I was invited to do a comedy show at a college in London. And when they invited me, they sent me what they called a behavioral agreement contract, which said that they had a zero-tolerance policy on the following things: racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism. And they also said that all jokes must be respectful and kind.
Not very funny then.
No. And when I turned it down, my fellow comedians called me a Nazi, so that was great. You know, I was in a very specific niche, the only Jewish Nazi comedian in the world, which was very beneficial. But what also happened is that story became the second most read story on the BBC News website on the day that the Prime Minister of Britain was nearly removed from office by her own party. Right. And the second story was no-name comedian turns down unpaid charity gig from some 2-bit college. And when that happened, I got thousands and thousands and thousands of messages from ordinary people who were saying, thank you for doing this, I agree with you, etc. So, in my opinion, the public are on our side, and we have an opportunity to win, and the way we win is by changing the narrative in our direction. So, I've been saying this for a long time. In my opinion, the media empires that are going to change the world, the media empires of the future, they're going to be built in the next 10 years. I hope we are here at the launch event of one of them. Thank you very much.
Will you stay for one question?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. He just has time for literally a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask one as I've got the microphone. You talked about, you mentioned your grandmother, the Gulag, and also in your book you mentioned your time in the former Soviet Union. I know you like to be positive, but what is it like to live in a society where there is no free speech?
Not good, as I think we're all seeing. I mean, in the UK, people are routinely arrested for things that they say, unless, of course, they celebrate Hamas. So we are in a situation where we've got... I don't think that, you know, the situation in the last couple of weeks has been shocking, not so much because of what's been happening, but because of the double standards we have seen. We have seen, for example, British protesters with English flags being immediately, you know, carted off or told not to be there, etc., while other protesters are encouraged to do it. So I think free speech is part of this conversation, but I actually think we've got bigger problems. The argument I would make is we have to have free speech in order to be able to solve them. In order to be able to solve, for example, the problems that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, it takes the ability to be able to say what we think about those things and to have that reflected in a democratic outcome of some kind. The shutting down of conversation is why we don't have the political outcomes that actually I think the vast majority of the public support.